So on behalf of Volunteer Nova Scotia and the King's Volunteer Resource Center, welcome to How to Start a Nonprofit with presenter Joel Stoddard. Joel is an experienced facilitator known for his engaging and practical approach to group learning. With a background in both small business and nonprofit development, Joel aims to deliver training where people walk away with confidence and knowledge. He has served on several nonprofit boards, including the Booker School, Deep Roots Music Cooperative, and the Clean River Annapolis River Project. He spent many years working at the Acadian Entrepreneurship Center, and he now works with the Community Business Development Corporation, the CBDC. He lives in the Annapolis Valley with his wife, Sasha, son, William, and daughter, Hannah. Welcome, Joel. The screen is yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. Can everybody hear me okay? If you can just give me a quick thumbs up or a hello in the comment section or whatever works best for you, just so I'll know I'm not speaking into the void. That would be terrific. Thank you. All right, perfect. So welcome to Starting a Nonprofit in 5 Easy Steps. And thank you to Carla and Heather and the King's Volunteer Resource Center for having me back to do this workshop. I did this workshop, I think, maybe for the first time in 2019 or 2018 or anyway, somewhere around there. It's been a while, but I have done this workshop a few times since and always enjoy this workshop, and I'll explain why in a minute. Just a couple of housekeeping. Heather's gone over most of the housekeeping things. I did want to mention, though, or sort of re-underline what Heather said about asking questions. I have a lot of presentation here, but I like to pause for questions. If there are questions that you have that you would like to ask, you don't need to wait until the end. Please go ahead and ask them. And Heather and Carla, if you happen to see questions come in that I haven't noticed, just stop me mid-sentence and we'll get to those. And of course, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for spending some of your Wednesday evening with me doing this. I do have some other nonprofit resources available. Heather touched on my bio a little bit, and I spent quite a bit of my adult life working for a now defunct nonprofit organization called the Acadia Entrepreneurship Center, which was housed at Acadia University. And I spent quite a number of years working. I mean, it itself was a not-for-profit organization, but I spent a lot of my days working with and for other nonprofit organizations, facilitating strategic planning, board governance, and a lot of other sorts of things relative or related to nonprofits. And part of the reason I enjoy this so much is because I don't get a chance to talk about the front end of not-for-profits all that much. Usually when we were to get pulled in, it was usually for some planning for existing non-for-profits or things like that. But this workshop sort of backs up and sort of talks about the front end, about how nonprofits get started, talks about some of the issues they face and some of the things that they need to do. So it's fun for me, and hopefully you enjoy it as well. I was just going to ask very quickly, and for some reason, I'm not seeing the comment box in my screen here, and I'm not sure why. But if you have a moment and you would like to type in a couple of things into the comments about who you are, what, if any, nonprofit organizations you might happen to be with now or have been with in the past, and also, and maybe most importantly, any key questions that you would like me to try to answer here this evening. I have a lot of content, but I would be most interested in answering the questions that you came seeking to have answered. So as I'm introducing myself a little bit more and getting started, if you want to go ahead and type some of that in, hopefully we can cover off some of that. So as was mentioned, I have a lot of hands-on board experience. I spent several years as a board member of the Deep Roots Music Cooperative, which is well timed since I think their festival is this weekend, maybe. I think it is this weekend in Wolfville. So I've spent some years doing that. I also spent a number of years as a board member of the Clean Annapolis River Project down in Annapolis Royal, which is an environmental not-for-profit organization. And I also most recently sit currently on the board of the Booker School, which is a small independent school in Port Williams, which most of you have probably driven by at some point or another. And I'm just wrapping up my first 3-year term on that board as well. So I come at this from various different angles, and I think it would be sufficient to say that I've made all the mistakes and I've seen all the mistakes made, and that makes it a little bit easier to do a workshop like this. So we have Sandy from the Port Lorne Community Association. Hello, Sandy. I'll try to keep an eye on this message box, but if I miss it, please just yell out. So here we go. So forgive me for the title of this workshop. It's called 5 Easy Steps to Starting a Not-for-Profit. Anyone who's ever started one knows there's probably nothing all that easy about it. So it's a little bit of maybe a bit of a misnomer, um, but we'll do our best to get through it. And the 5 steps that we're going to look at here over the next hour and a bit are as follows. Number 1 is, should I start a not-for-profit organization? Number 2 is, who else do I involve, or should I involve, or can I involve in the not-for-profit organization? Step 3, what's the plan? So we'll talk briefly about sort of strategic planning and getting your sort of so-called ducks in a row, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. Number 4, we'll talk a little bit about friend raising and getting your stakeholders all together and figuring out who they are. And then we'll talk about some of the real sort of administrative, logistical, nuts and bolts of actually how to go about registering and bylaws and, memorandum of association and all that sort of thing. So we'll cover off those 5 steps. And like I said, if you have any questions in the meantime, I'll pause in between each step and we'll see where the conversation goes. So I see we have Jim here as well. Jim has volunteered with and served on the boards of several not-for-profits, and as the executive director CEO for a not-for-profit for up to 10 years, but never part of a startup. And I think that's interesting because I'm kind of right there with you, Jim. And I've been a part of a lot of not-for-profits, but I've not usually been, and I've helped some start, but I've never really been a part of the startup of a not-for-profit myself. So it's an interesting step. It's an interesting piece of work that people have to go through to do this, and we'll sort of dive right into it. All right. So I know most people, I'm not going to belabor this point because I know most of you sort of probably know this already. Your affiliation with the Volunteer Resource Center probably has gotten you this far already. But I do want to talk just very, very briefly about what actually is a nonprofit organization. I don't want to take for granted that everybody, speaks the language and understands that. So very quickly, a not-for-profit organization exists to serve a public, community, or mutual benefit purpose. It is, as the title implies, not to earn profits, not so that somebody can take home excess profits at the end of the day or anything like that. Not-for-profits have to be set up to promote, among other things. I think I've got pretty well everything here on the list, but if I haven't, somebody can correct me. To promote culture, education, recreation, community development, environmental protection, social welfare, and/or religion. So some of the not-for-profits that you're probably familiar with touch a few of these boxes all at once. Some of them might be very specific to one of these particular categories. But generally speaking, you do have to be doing one of these things or advancing one of these causes in order to be considered to be a not-for-profit organization. Surpluses have to be reinvested. Again, it's not against the law, despite contrary to what some people may believe. It's not against the law to make a profit as a not-for-profit or to make a bunch of money. It just means that you have to be prepared to reinvest that in your mission, in your vision, to the benefit of the communities that you're intending to serve. And you can be incorporated, unincorporated, or charitable. And I'm not going to touch on that now, but I am going to circle back to that a little bit later because there are some distinctions to be made between unincorporated, incorporated, or charitable not-for-profit organizations. So be aware that we will circle back to that. I won't forget that in the end. Um, Sorry, I'm just going to circle back to the chat box here for a minute. Kathy is here. Kathy is the co-chair of the Kingston Greenwood Holiday Hamper Program. We're a group of community volunteers who have run this program for 3 years and are now hoping to register as a not-for-profit. Great. Excellent. And Joiin is here, and Joiin's been on 30 or more boards. That's a lot of boards, and you must be a very busy person. Over the years, and a lot of not-for-profits currently on the Valley Regional Hospital Board. Excellent. And Daryl is here, and Daryl's volunteered around the community, but no experience directly in the not-for-profit. Excellent. Well, thank you all for introducing yourself. If I've missed anyone or if there are others to introduce themselves, I'll try to pick up on those as we go along. Okay. Let's see. Oh yeah, of course. And my last bullet point here on this slide is to be either an incorporated not-for-profit or a registered charity, you do have to register under the Nova Scotia Societies Act, which is a long and very, pardon my frankness, kind of boring document to read. But it is nonetheless the law of the land in Nova Scotia when it comes to governing and legislating not-for-profit organizations. So that's the Coles notes on what exactly a not-for-profit is. There's more to it than that, but that's kind of the overview. So now we jump into the 5 steps. So how to start a not-for-profit in 5 easy steps. Step 1 sounds like it might be a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but is actually a really very good and important question. The first question I like to ask people when they used to come in and sit across my desk and talk about their social aims or not-for-profit aims is to actually decide whether you should, in fact, start a not-for-profit organization. I've had the benefit of meeting a lot of enthusiastic people with a lot of really awesome goals and noble aims and all that sort of stuff, who were very, very certain that the right path for them was to start a not-for-profit. And it may be, in some cases it is, in some cases it's not. And I always like to sort of back people up a little bit just to ask them some basic questions about whether they should or shouldn't do it, and whether or not there's another alternate or more efficient path to get them to where they're ultimately looking to get. So the questions that I would typically ask them are as follows. Number 1, are you really committed to this? Are you really sure? I know you're committed, but are you really, really, really committed to it? Starting a not-for-profit organization takes a long time. It doesn't take a long time to register one, but most of the not-for-profits you know now, because you see them in the community, there was a whole lot of background work that went into that before you ever saw them in a public-facing way. I kind of compare it. I don't know if anybody here is in bands or has ever been in bands, but by the time you discover a band, but by the time everybody knows them, they've been spending many, many years in their garage and plotting things out before you ever sort of heard of them. And the same thing is true of a lot of not-for-profits, is that a lot of people did a lot of behind the scenes planning and work and grunt work and rolling up their sleeves before they ever actually saw the light of day. So I always ask that question. Are you sure you want to do this? And if the answer is yes, great. Then we move on to another question, which is, are your objectives more short-term or are they long-term? The reason I ask this question is because, generally speaking, not-for-profits are meant to be sustained over a fairly long and indefinite period of time. That's not exclusively true. I mean, there are exceptions to that. But I've had the benefit of meeting a lot of people whose goals are not for profit in nature, but are generally more short-term in nature. And for this reason, a lot of people end up starting task forces, or they start up informal community groups, or in more recent years, for example, people might start GoFundMe or online, campaigns to achieve a certain cause, and all of which is great. And I'm not discouraging that, but all that is to say that sometimes a long-term registered formal not-for-profit is not necessarily the perfect vehicle to do what you're trying to do. So make sure that you're objectives generally are more long-term in nature first. What role do you see yourself playing is another question I like to ask people because I've met a lot of people who wanted to start not-for-profits for a lot of good reasons, but one of the reasons that sometimes people want to start them is because they themselves want to be the head of a not-for-profit organization, or they envision themselves working themselves into a job or being the leader, or I don't know, maybe otherwise having the social standing that might come along with being the, executive director of a not-for-profit or the board chair or whatever role they're hoping to fulfill. And I have, in fact, met a few people who just really wanted a job and thought that starting a not-for-profit would be a good way to go about doing that. I'm not arguing against that. I mean, there are good reasons to, to want to do that. But there are probably easier ways to find income than to set yourself up over the long term as a not-for-profit founder. So I always like to talk to people about what role they see themselves in. Sometimes the answer is, I don't know. I just want the cause to be fulfilled and I don't really care what I'm doing. I'll do anything. I'll do whatever it takes because I'm so passionate about what it is that I'm trying to do. And another question I like to ask on the same sort of thread is there another nonprofit organization already trying to do the same things that you're trying to do? And this gets a little bit sticky because the answer to this question in most cases is sort of. Usually, whatever cause you're looking to set up a not-for-profit to do, there's somebody out there in the universe who probably doesn't have the exact same aim, but who probably has a very comparable or related aim. And I wish I could think of a good example right off the top of my head, but I can't. But there are about, just for the record, there are about 7,200 nonprofit organizations in Nova Scotia, or as of last year, there were anyway. So that's a lot of not-for-profits trying to do a lot of things under those 7 or 8 categories that we looked at earlier. And it's always wise to scan the environment first to find out who's doing what and to find out whether you'd be better off pooling your energy and resources with them, or if you are distinct enough that you really want to go off and sort of start your own not-for-profit organization, recognizing that sometimes, support, fundraising dollars, government support, these are sometimes finite resources. And sometimes you find yourself competing with more and more people for an ever smaller pool of support. So that's another question. I don't ask these questions to deter people. I know it seems like these are kind of deterring questions. That's not the point. The point is really just to sort of test people's commitment and make sure that they are going down the right path and that this is the right vehicle for them. And of course, last but not least, are you ready to slog and to be ignored? Most people at some point in the founding process of a not-for-profit organization are ignored, or they're, I don't want to say they're laughed out of the room because most people won't do that, but it's hard. It's hard to get attention when you don't have credibility or you don't necessarily have, a huge group of, stakeholders or, committee members or board members or whatever it is that you're going to do. And sometimes it's hard to gain that initial traction when you're starting a nonprofit. So that's step one, is to decide whether you should. And I see we have a question. So go ahead, June. If you can either unmute yourself or you can ask it in the chat box, whichever works best for you.
I think I'll unmute myself. You may cover this, but I just wanted to ask,
Yep.
how do you think GoFundMe's have affected nonprofits?
So is the question, how do GoFundMe's affect nonprofits?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to be the expert on GoFundMe's, but I can just generally say more often than not, most nonprofits, in my experience, don't do GoFundMe's a lot. GoFundMe's, I'm not saying they don't or can't, just that they often don't. GoFundMe's are generally, we see them more for, short-term urgent things. Somebody has been in an accident, or somebody has, lost income, or, has suffered some kind of immediate, difficulty in their life. And there's a GoFundMe for a very short period of time to do that. But it's not to say nonprofits can't or shouldn't. The tax implications of that, I don't know. I presume that it just works the same way as any other fundraising would work, that if you are a registered charity, then you can probably issue your tax receipts for that. Or if you're not a registered charity, of course, you can't issue tax receipts. But it's as most of us know, because most of us see GoFundMes from time to time, a lot of them do tend to go viral. And it's a good way to gain exposure. I tend to think that the reason a lot of not-for-profits don't do a lot of GoFundMes is because GoFundMes are a little bit hard to do for general fundraising. GoFundMes tend to be more attached to a very specific time-bounded sort of thing, whatever that thing might be. So if you were a nonprofit and you were trying to build a building or buy a trailer or something to set up shop, that would be a very specific thing that maybe you could do a GoFundMe for. But in terms of just general fundraising, I don't see that as much. Maybe I'm just looking in the wrong places, but tax-wise, I wish I could give you a better answer. Maybe somebody else knows the answer to that. Any other questions?
I wonder, just to lead from that, I wonder if it would impact the ability for people to, in terms of donations, would it be, maybe would it, kind of compete for limited resources if people have so many dollars to donate? I wonder if GoFundMe, would that impact nonprofits, their ability to accept donations?
It's a great question. I mean, that's probably a whole category unto itself. Again, I tend to think that, in 2025, it is wise for nonprofits to be using technology to their utmost advantage in terms of publicity and fundraising. Having been on some different boards that do fundraising, I can't immediately think of a time where we use an online GoFundMe. Now, we've used e-transfer, we've done online fundraising campaigns, but I don't know that we've used an online fundraising platform like GoFundMe or some of the other ones that might be out there. But maybe that's just a lack of our own innovation that's holding us back from that. But again, I guess I circle back to the fact that most of the GoFundMes that I see in the community are linked to a very, very sort of unexpected or short-term aim that usually you see run by people who are nonprofit in nature, but who aren't necessarily a nonprofit organization. They're just concerned community members who want to rally around a cause, all of which is great. And that's it. To hold that thought, as I said before, I am going to circle back in the end to the difference between incorporated, unincorporated, and registered charities. And that's where that will come into play, maybe a little bit more. Okay. So presuming everybody gets past step number one, which is everybody decides, okay, yes, this is for me. I am going to start a nonprofit. I try to go to number two, which is to encourage whoever wants to start a nonprofit organization to set about finding as many like-minded and committed people as they possibly can find. You need a team. You need a lot of people around you who share your same ideas. And it's not to say that you can't do it by yourself in the beginning, but ultimately to start a nonprofit, a registered nonprofit anyway, is that you do, I think, need five initial members, and you also need a minimum of 3 board members. So if you don't have that many people who are willing to stand beside you, there will be some problems organizing formally your nonprofit. So I always encourage people to go and start looking at who shares their vision, mission, and passion. What are you looking for in fellow board members? These seem like obvious questions, but very important questions. What skills are you looking for? What beliefs, what values, what connections? I've met people before because I have been called in at the early stages of not-for-profits to work on initial strategic plans and that sort of thing. And I've met some folks who thought they had a lot more of the same shared beliefs than they actually had when they had to start putting it down on paper. And that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean you can't, work through it and all that sort of thing. It's just that when you get a lot of motivated people, it's easy to overlook some of the differences that you might have in terms of what are we about? What is our core philosophy? What are our values? What is the central vision and purpose of this not-for-profit that we're here to start? And if you can sit down with those early founders and say, and iron some of these things out, you're way ahead of the game, and you're going to save yourself a lot of trouble in the end. To compare this to business, which may or may not be a completely fair comparison, is that if I met a group of 3 or 4 people who wanted to start a business together, I would always, I wouldn't, I mean, I can't force them to, but I would encourage them to have a partnership agreement, which is kind of the same sort of idea, which is there are 4 of us, we want to start a business together. Don't worry, it'll all work out, are some famous last words that you sometimes hear right before the partnership, goes sideways. So there's nothing wrong with this. This is encouraged. If you don't all agree, that's okay. Maybe you need to go through some work and some planning to get there, but definitely go through that up front. And do you know these people, and can you count on them to sustain their energy? A lot of people who are starting not-for-profits naturally start with people they know. Joel wants to start a not-for-profit, so the natural thing that I'm going to do is probably first talk to all the people that I can think of in my, immediate network and say, here's what I'm doing. You want to come hang out and start a not-for-profit with me? And maybe the answer is yes, maybe it's no. But if it's no, then maybe they'll know somebody, and then there will be a second-degree connection there that somebody else will join. But nonetheless, you will need people. This is not a solo exercise. This is something that you will need to build a coalition of people around, and that's a step. That can be a slog. I mean, it can take some time, but it is nonetheless a critical point of starting a nonprofit. So I'm going to stop. I promise to stop after every step and see if anybody has any comments or questions that they want to add. So I'll pause there for a moment.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
With the, partner agreements, is it a good idea to get all that on paper and that commitment on paper before beginning, or what's your feeling about that?
Yeah. In a for-profit context, absolutely. I mean, I know I'll circle back to nonprofits in a minute, but in a for-profit, absolutely. I mean, there's legal partnership agreements that you get and all that sort of stuff. The good thing about non-for-profits is that when you start one, you are required, in order to register one, you are required to file your memorandum of association and your bylaws. And that really forces you to do it. You can't get the stamp of approval from the, registry of joint stock companies until enough people have signed on that page that says, these are our objects, this is what we're here for, and all that sort of thing. And so it's not really even optional for most registered nonprofits. You do have to get that out. Now, that doesn't mean there's still not room for disagreements. You can be somewhat vague in your memorandum of association and your objects, and there can be plenty of room for disagreement as the organization grows and you split hairs later on. But you do need to do that to get registered. Any other questions or comments about finding the people? I know there's a workshop coming up maybe next month, I think, on keeping the people and maybe finding the people. All right.
I think
Okay.
sorry, I think we have
Yeah, go ahead.
in the chat.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Jim is wondering, do you have any thoughts about how to evaluate whether people are committed and ready to act and sustain action?
That's a really great question. And I wish I knew an easy answer to that. And usually it's there are some red, I can't say who will, but I can say who won't. And sometimes, the red flags that I'm always looking for is if people are rah at the beginning and you can't get them to commit to sitting around the table long enough to set out your objects and memorandum of association, or they're not willing to sit down at the table to sort of work out a framework of a strategic plan, or some of the basic things that really have to be done. Those are some pretty big red flags that maybe that person's not. It doesn't mean they can't be a supporter or a friend. It just means that they're probably not going to be the people that are going to do the heavy lifting with you. And what you're looking for in the beginning is those heavy lifters, or at least that's what I would be looking for at the beginning. Otherwise, I mean, I guess, it comes down to who you know. I mean, if I'm starting a not-for-profit, chances are I'm going to start with people I already know, who I just know from the community or from my professional life or whatever, who I just know their character and know they either have that in them or they don't. Um, but if you have to look for new people who you don't know and who you don't have an affiliation with, I'm always looking for those people who will sit down and put in some of the upfront work. And if they're not willing to do that, then that's great. There's probably still some role for you to play at some point, but in the founding stage, we're looking for those heavy lifters and that sort of thing. I don't know if anybody else has advice on that. That would be my 2 cents worth. And I think it's also about fitting people in where they fit in. Not everybody's meant to be a founding member of a not-for-profit. Not everybody is meant to sit down and write out bylaws and policies and stuff like that. Some people are meant to go on, the radio and promote you, and some people are meant to go out and ask their connections if they wouldn't mind donating to what you're doing, or there's ways for people to contribute that aren't necessarily at the startup stage of things. So as I mentioned, this isn't really a workshop on strategic planning, but this is another step in the process, which is I mean, personally, and I know people do this and everyone can do as they wish. I would probably never start a not-for-profit organization formally without some version of a strategic plan that includes a vision statement, a mission statement, core values and guiding principles, desired outcomes and key performance indicators. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's how we'll know we're successful. And I also probably wouldn't start without having some preliminary discussion about possible sources of funding and financial strategy. I know that's not a conversation that's always fun to have, but unless your plan is to be forever a complete volunteer-based organization with no paid staff or anything, then you're going to need funding. And even if you are all volunteers, you'll still need some funding because there will still be some operating expenses that you'll need to, somebody will have to contribute to, even if they're minimal. So I always like to see that initial conversation of what's our strategy here? Are we going to rely on grants? Are we going to rely on project funding, donations? Are we going to earn revenue? Are we going to offer a service to the community? Some of you who live here probably noticed that Capri recently started a laundromat, I think, in New Minas. And, of course, we all know the Flower Card and other not-for-profits who are very, very creative at earning revenue. Is that going to be your strategy? Are there member fees? Is it straight door knocking for fundraising? Are we, sort of how are we going about this? And the answer can be, well, maybe it's a little bit of everything, but it's always good to have something cemented in terms of how you plan to sort of go about doing that in your strategic plan. And also division of roles. As I said before, who's going to do what? Who brings what skills to the table? I know there's some resources. I don't know. I think I've probably got some that I can send along. It's kind of a bit of a skills map, which is here we're going to take a bunch of people and everyone's going to identify their skills relative to not-for-profit management. And we're going to all list all of our skills, and then we're going to arrange ourselves according to who's good at what. Joiin might be great with finances. Great. June gets pigeonholed into being the treasurer. Jim might be great at writing proposals. Perfect. We'll sign Jim up for that. And on it goes that you try to fit people in where they belong. This doesn't have to be a 40-page document. It doesn't have to have a million appendices. It's probably better if it doesn't, as a matter of fact. But I like to see that there's that basic framework of agreement that here's what we see, here's our vision, here's our mission, here's what we're all agreeing to, and here's our marching orders as we set about to tell the world about what we're trying to do. Because nothing sort of stifles the momentum of a nonprofit faster than if all 5 or 6 or 10 people who are involved at the beginning are all going out to the community and they're all saying something different about who you are and what you're trying to do. That confuses people very quickly. And it sort of creates this sort of, I mean, you can imagine if a business did this, if a business had 5 marketing people and all of them were out there promoting something different and it was just haphazard, it just confuses the market and really just puts the wind in your face as opposed to at your back. Any questions about that? I haven't really done service to the strategic plan because that's a whole category unto itself, but any questions or comments about that? All right. Step number 4 is to involve stakeholders in your plan. So presuming that you have done all the internal work, you've met together, you've got your team has agreed on what you're doing and what your general plan is and what your strategy is going to be, then that's when you start, for lack of a better expression, spreading the gospel and telling people what you're up to and what you're trying to do and how they might be able to support you. So that's when you start involving stakeholders in your plan, or at least that's probably when I would include stakeholders in the plan. So that always starts with a question of who are your stakeholders? I mean, who cares, right? Like, I mean, I don't mean to be crass. That sounds like a poor way of phrasing it, but who else has an investment emotionally or financially or otherwise in you succeeding at this not-for-profit that you're going to start? Is it government agencies? Is it people in the community that have a certain need? Is it, who is it? I mean, who are the people that are hoping that you will be able to be successful at running your not-for-profit and doing what you're claiming to be doing? So you might want to divide them. I don't mean divide them in a bad way, but just sort of segment them into, are they clients? Who are your clients? Who are your partners? So clients, who are you going to serve? Who are your partners? Who are the organizations that might be willing to join arms with you and work together on projects with you? Who are your funders? Maybe it's government, maybe it's not. Maybe it's a foundation, maybe it's somebody else. Who are your donors? Are there donors? Is this organization even an organization that has micro donors who are donating to you on a regular basis? Who are your suppliers? Do you have suppliers? Who are the government folks with the most at stake in what you're doing? Are they municipal? Are they provincial? Are they federal? Are they maybe all of the above? Who are the community groups? This is sometimes referred to as friend raising, which is obviously a spin on fundraising, but friend raising. And this is where you're really going out there and sort of spreading your message and also asking for support from these folks. And in order to do that, of course, your strategic plan needs to outline what can people do to support you. It's very difficult to go out to someone and ask for support. And then when they say, we love it, how can we help? And then you go, oh, well, I don't know. I'll get back to you. We'll think about that. You really want to know and have your, ducks in a row so that when you go out there and you're asking for support, it's very clear to people how they can support you, make it as easy for them as possible, and just sort of map that out for them. And they may have some ideas of their own. That's great. If they want to add to it, or maybe they have other ideas, and that's fine. But you definitely want to have some idea when you're approaching a person or a group of how they can best support your cause. What is their level of interest in your mission, and what is their influence? I'm going to just briefly, in a couple of minutes, I'm just going to show something called, it's a planning tool called the Mendelow's Matrix, which some of you may have heard of, and most of you probably haven't, because it's kind of a tool for wonks like me who enjoys, segmenting things into graphs and all this kind of stuff. So we'll talk about that in a second. So the Mendelow's matrix, and do they see you as a partner or as a competitor? And this is tough because in the not-for-profit world, we always like to think everyone is our partner. We all are in this for the right reasons. But if you ran across another not-for-profit who saw you as a threat rather than a friend, you wouldn't be the first one, and you probably won't be the last, because as you know, a lot of not-for-profits, as it was alluded to earlier, are competing for finite or relatively finite donations and funds and government support or whatever else it is they're looking for. And so not every group is necessarily going to see you as a partner, even if you might see them as a partner. For whatever reason, they might, have their little territory. And unfortunately, we do see some of that in the not-for-profit sector from time to time. I'm not pointing fingers at anyone in particular, but it does happen. And it's important that you think about that before you approach different people and try to understand how you'll be perceived. So I talked about the Mendelow's matrix. So what I like to do, an exercise I like to go through with not-for-profits at any stage, whether you're startup or not, is this process of listing out all of your stakeholders. Tell me everyone and every conceivable group of people or person that you can think of who could be a stakeholder. And then once you've done that, we start categorizing them a little bit. We start categorizing them in terms of how interested are they in your organization's work and how influential are they in your organization's work. And so that creates 4 quadrants. And the reason we segment these, different stakeholders into different groups is because depending on where a stakeholder lands in this graph is going to require a little bit of a different approach for you to manage that relationship with them. So for example, if you look at this pink square down here at the bottom right, it says these are key players. Why are they key players? They're key players because their interest level in what you're doing is very high, and their influence over your ability to succeed is also high. So these might be people that are funders, or probably going to be funders or donors or key donors. So they have a lot of influence over, whether you succeed or whether you don't, or a relative amount of influence over whether you succeed or don't. And they also are very interested. On the contrary, if you go up to the other corner and you look at people who, well, yeah, we're interested in you. We hope you succeed. We wish you all the best, and we'll try to show up for your events. But maybe we're not going to give you a whole bunch of money or anything like that. These are more low priority stakeholders. Now, I know it's painful to categorize somebody as low priority because it just feels wrong. And I don't mean to diminish, they're all our friends, they're all our stakeholders. But it is important to be able to distinguish, who needs to know what. So the key players might need to be informed all the time. They might need constant updates. They might want you to come visit them. They might want you to have a phone call with them or get your newsletter all the time or something like that. Or to know, they might want to report on, what kind of progress you made. Whereas your low priority, stakeholders, the occasional update will do. It's not, we don't have to, be knocking on their door all the time and that sort of thing. So I'm getting on a bit of a sidebar. That's just a little bit of a tool that you can use once you've identified all of your partners, clients, stakeholders, to try and sort of make sense of them in terms of how you approach each one. And there are strategies associated with each one of these quadrants as well. So I think there's a comment or a question here, so I'm just going to read it. For a community hall, is it prudent to register with joint stocks in order to limit personal liability? Would an informal community group be better than a not-for-profit? Yeah, that's a really great question. I was going to talk about that later, but since it's come up, I'll just sort of mention it now. Generally speaking, yes, having an incorporated not-for-profit does limit your personal liability in a way that not being incorporated does not. Now, you still need, in a lot of cases, or probably all cases, you still need insurance as a not-for-profit, as a registered not-for-profit. So there's directors and officers insurance that you can get. There's other forms of insurance. It's not that expensive for most nonprofits. Most nonprofits are not engaged, for the most part, in high risk activities, so to speak. So the insurance policies tend to be fairly inexpensive. There might be exceptions to that, but generally not. But as a rule, as a community hall, to go back to your example, if you're not registered and it's just a bunch of, committed, dedicated volunteers who are running things, and something goes awry, it is conceivable, absolutely, that somebody would, come after you personally. Somebody's at your hall, somebody serves them too many drinks, or they slip and fall, or I don't know, all the things that could happen at a community hall. But if it did, there would be some personal liability that would be higher for sure than if you were registered and had insurance. I don't mean to scare people. I don't like doing that. And in most cases, it's not every day you hear about not-for-profits being sued or anything like that. But it does happen. And when it does happen, it's probably not all that pleasant. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right. What we'll do, we'll finish our fifth step, and then maybe we'll go to break, Heather, for a few minutes, and then we'll come back, and I have some more things I want to chat about, and then we can start into a Q&A and hopefully have a little bit of discussion about some of these things. So this is where it gets boring or fun, depending on your vantage point. For me, this is kind of fun, believe it or not. So step 5 is where, okay, so you've gone through all that front end stuff, and we've all agreed, we've all hugged, and we've all met a lot of friends, and we've all gotten a lot of support for what we're doing. Then we register and we get to work. So there's a formal process that you go through for this, which I'll talk a little bit about. The organization that you're going to want to be in touch with is called the Registry of Joint Stock Companies, which some of you are familiar with. It's the same place that you would go if you wanted to register a business name in the province of Nova Scotia. And I'll talk about the advantages of registering. We just touched on one, which is liability, a minute ago, but maybe we'll talk a bit more about that after. So you talk to the Registry of Joint Stock Companies, and one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to have to reserve a name. You're going to have to come up with something to call yourselves as an organization. This can always be fun. This is an exercise that, is, and I mean that, it is fun. I mean, you do get to kind of be creative and think about what name is going to make the best impact for you in the community when people hear it. I don't want people to pore over it forever to the point where they don't start, but I do encourage people to put some thought into the name. Side note, I also encourage people to think about the acronym that sometimes goes along with whatever name they choose. Sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes nonprofits get shortened to their acronym, whatever that might happen to be. When we were the Acadia Entrepreneurship Center, we were more commonly known as AEC, and before that we were AXB, and Capri is Capri, which I think is Community Area Parents for Real Enterprise. But the long and short of it is you will know a lot of not-for-profits more by their acronym than by their name. So you might want to think about that when you're sort of starting up your organization and choosing a name. You will also need a memorandum of association, which is sort of, in informal terms, it's kind of your birth certificate as an organization. The good news is that this all sounds like complicated work, and it can be, but there's a lot of fill in the blanks forms that you can get from the registry of joint stock companies that make this process easier for you. You still need to come do some of the hard work, but you don't need to start with a blank sheet of paper and, and just go, okay, well, what are we doing here? Who's the lawyer that can tell us how to do this? It's usually a fairly straightforward exercise. They ask you the questions, you fill in the blanks, you tell them what you're about, and then you file that. Again, you need to classify yourself. So they're going to ask you about your objects. They're going to remember in the early slides we talked about, are you religious? Are you environmental? Are you social? Are you educational, recreational? You will have to classify yourself. The government wants to know what you're doing and what you're up to. And further down the road, if you decide to register yourself as a charity, then you'll really need to focus in on some of this stuff, and that will get a little bit more complicated. Anyway, we'll talk about charities briefly after. June, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering for the classification, what if it's a couple of classifications? What if something puts into, four?
That's a really good question. It's been a while since I've done it. I think you either get the option to check multiple boxes, or you get a primary classification and a secondary classification. I should know the answer to this. I think it's that you can choose multiple. But I do think they like you to designate your primary, because I do think those categories are somewhat distinct. And I do think that you are asked to designate one as this is our primary classification. And, I guess conceivably you could be a recreational organization that also does some environmental work. I mean, there's crossover there somewhere, surely. But I'll have to go back and look to give you a definitive answer. And then you have to create your bylaws, and your bylaws that's kind of here, I'll skip ahead and then I'll come back. So your memorandum of association is your founding charter document. It establishes your legal existence, your organization's name, purpose, address, the names of your board members, your founding members, and amendments for this usually require government approval. So if you ever want to change this, you're going to have to go back to the Registry of Joint Stocks, and there's going to be a little bit of a process that you're going to have to do if you decide later that, oh, wait, no, we've changed our objectives. We're not this anymore. We're this. They're going to want you to note that with them, and they're going to have to review that to make sure they're still okay with that. And your bylaws are really internal rules governing your day-to-day operations. This pertains to all the fun stuff about membership rules, meeting procedures, elections and appointments of officers, duties and powers, conflicts of interest, all I call it the rule book, so to speak. Anyone who's spent much time on not-for-profit organizations knows what a fun exercise this can be when somebody's at a meeting and they say, what do our bylaws say about this? And then somebody goes filing through the bylaws and they can't find it. And then we all stop the meeting. And anyway, I'm getting sidetracked, but you know what I mean. But either way, you will have to do both of these things in order to register with the Registry of Joint Stock Companies. And then there's some fees, notice of directors. So the people who are standing as initial directors, they will have to identify themselves, who they are, what their address is, their personal address, and all that sort of stuff. And that information lives publicly on the Registry of Joint Stocks website. I don't know if your personal address does. I don't think it does. I think that would be a violation of your personal privacy or something like that, but I'll have to go check. I'm not 100% sure on that. But either way, your name will stand publicly as a director of that organization. And then there are fees and requirements, which aren't substantial. I think it's about $50 to register a name, and then another $100 or something like that to register as an official organization. And then you're there. You're official. You're officially official. You're a thing. You're more than a group of people meeting in someone's living room talking about all the cool things you could do. You are recognized by the government as a functioning organization. For all intents and purposes, that that doesn't mean anything tangible. And I mean, you could go through all of these steps up to here and register without really having ever accomplished anything or raised any money. Um, and oftentimes that it's kind of like registering a business name. I'll meet with somebody who wants to start a business. They'll register the business name before their door is ever open or before they do anything. All this really does is kind of put you on the map and gives you a placeholder so that when you start doing what you're doing, then you've got, you've got this legal existence behind you to sort of do it. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. We can come back to that later. Any questions? Comments, questions? Or have I put everybody to sleep already? Is this information overload? All right. So I don't know, Heather, if we want to take a quick
So
5 minutes.
5 minutes. So maybe if we come back at 8:05. So there.
I timed that out pretty good to be right at 8 o'clock
You
when we
did.
took our
Yeah,
break.
that was perfect.
I'd love to say I did that on purpose, but it just sort of
Well,
worked
you
out
have your
that way.
cadence down. So yeah, no, it's perfect. Okay,
All
so
right. We'll see you in 5 minutes. That was I realize that's a lot of information in a very, very short period of time. I have a couple of other things to go through, but I'm also really, really interested in what questions you have. So I'll go through a couple of things pretty quickly, and then I'll just be quiet so that people can bring up their comments and questions. One of the questions that comes up is, it's come up already a few times tonight, is what is the big difference between these different levels of not-for-profit status, unincorporated, incorporated, or charity. And you can see, I'll just briefly gloss over this because I know you can see it there on your screen. So an unincorporated not-for-profit is really just a group of concerned citizens who do something. So if somebody, if there's something going on in the community that, somebody's off work and needs a fundraiser or something, people do that. There is personal liability involved in this when you do things with a group of friends in an organized way, and hopefully nothing will go wrong. Probably nothing will go wrong, but if something does go wrong, there is some liability that can come back at you. No property or contract rights, no tax donation benefits or anything like that. But on the plus side, no filing or compliance requirements. The government's not interested in, I mean, they just don't have a vested interest in you reporting on every little thing that you do to benefit your community. So that's good. The incorporated not-for-profit, a little bit different. It is a legal entity. With the right insurance, it is a limited liability situation for members and board members. That doesn't mean you can go around doing anything you want and, not have any consequences, but generally speaking, as long as you're acting in good faith, then you're fine. You can enter into contracts. You can, own property. No, you cannot issue tax receipts, unfortunately. You can accept donations, but you can't issue tax receipts for it. And you do have annual filings with the provincial registry, not a lot. You do have to file, I think, your AGM, the minutes from your AGM, and I think you have to update your director's list. There might be a couple of other things that you have to do from time to time along that front. But it's not tremendously cumbersome, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but there is some responsibility. And it's such that if they don't hear from you, if you don't do those things, they will come looking eventually for you and asking, why aren't you told us you were a legal entity doing these things. We are now expecting to hear from you every so often with your filings. Why aren't we hearing from you? And then, if you don't file forever or for a prolonged period of time, you'll probably get some warnings, and then probably they'll just revoke they'll just assume you're not doing anything and they'll revoke your status. Charity is an altogether different thing. This too is a legal entity. I've actually had the benefit of going through the charitable registration process on a couple of occasions with two different organizations. Um, I wasn't the central player or anything like that, but I was involved in it. This is quite a process. This is, you know, when you're becoming a registered charity, the federal government really wants you to, they want to know a lot about you. If they're giving tax, if you're giving tax receipts and they're giving, tax breaks to people who donate to you, they have a real vested interest in making sure you're doing things properly and that you're doing things that are within the boundaries of the law and all kinds of other things, and that your governance and management is prudent, and that they can count on you to report things as they are occurring and accurately and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot that goes into becoming a charity, and there's a fair bit that goes into on an ongoing basis after you become a charity, like your annual filings and all that kind of stuff that that you just have to keep up to date. And there's audits that have to be done that ensure that you are being properly financially managed and that you're not doing anything untoward financially and all that sort of thing. I know that's a very brief summary of what it means to be a charity, uh, but it's much more complicated. I think you would find the jump between incorporated nonprofit and charity to be quite substantial. The jump between unincorporated not-for-profit and incorporated not-for-profit, I mean, there still is a difference for sure. It's probably just a little bit less. That's all. Okay, and just for fun, last thing I'm going to mention here, some of you might recognize this. I just, out of pure curiosity, I asked ChatGPT, what are the 30 most frequently asked questions about starting a nonprofit in Nova Scotia? Because I was curious as to what it would come up with, and this is what it came up with. So most of these we've covered off. There was a question that Leslie asked, so register with both joint stocks and the Nova Scotia Societies Act. I apologize. That's not correct. That's probably the way I made it sound. But once you register with joint stocks, you are, and you do those things that I mentioned earlier, you are considered registered under the Societies Act. So there's not two registrations there. There's just sort of the one. So most of these we've covered off. I'm just going to scan down through quickly to see if anything. You need 5 members. You can't do it alone because you need multiple members. How do I choose a name? That's kind of interesting because there are some rules around this. We talked a little bit about naming earlier. The name has to be unique. It can't be misleading. And it has to be approved through a Nuance name search, which is just the government's name searching process, whatever it is that they use. So you do need to be unique so that you can't be confused with some other nonprofit organization that's already registered, and it can't be misleading. Presumably you're not going to try to come up with something that's misleading, but maybe from time to time it does happen. What documents are needed? Memorandum of association, bylaws, completed application forms. Incorporation usually takes 2 to 4 weeks, depending on who on the government is in vacation that week or whatever other reasons they might have for taking a little bit longer or less long. Do I need a board? Yes, you do, to be an incorporated nonprofit of 3 directors. Can directors be paid? No, generally no, unless allowed by bylaws and not prohibited by funding agreements. In almost all cases, your board members in a startup nonprofit are not going to be paid. I don't know that I've ever really seen an exception to that. Larger nonprofits and registered charities sometimes do have this. Do we need to have an AGM? Do we really need to have an AGM? Yes, you do. You need to have an AGM every year. You need to keep records. You need to keep a membership list. You need to keep meeting minutes. You need to have financial statements and official correspondence. These are some of the reasons that are deterrents for people that are on the borderline of, do we really want to formalize this or don't we? Is that sometimes people are put off by the filings, and that's okay. I get that. Let's let's see, do I need a business number? If you hire employees, which isn't the case for most startup not-for-profits, but you do need a business number if you're hiring employees and getting charitable status and filing payroll and all that kind of stuff. Let's see, what haven't we covered here? Common funding sources. Can we get government grants? Yes, you can. Doesn't mean you will, but you can. Or it doesn't mean that will be your strategy necessarily, but you're open to that. Do we need insurance? Usually, yes. The good news is, as I said before, that's usually not very expensive in most nonprofit organizations. Do volunteers need to be paid? No. You can pay your volunteers if you want to, and if you have the funds to do it. Or you can reimburse expenses if somebody's traveling for a meeting or a conference or whatever. June, you have a question?
I do. It was the page back though, sorry. If you wouldn't mind going back a page.
Is this the one or one more page back?
No, 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 no. The nonprofits. Oh,
Is it the number 15 about records or?
no, I think I'm losing my mind.
No, that's okay.
It was on the page
I,
that we were on.
let's see if it jumps out at you.
Can't see it. If I see it, I'll definitely raise my hand again.
Okay. If it comes up, if it comes to mind, just let me know, jump in and cut me off for sure. What happens if we don't file returns? Well, we sort of talked about that. Your organization can be dissolved. Can we change our bylaws? Yes, by special resolutions at members' meetings and filing with the registry. Probably one of the biggest challenges nonprofits run into, especially in the early stages, is procedural. We have all these procedures that we've set out, but you know how it is when you get people at meetings and people might not remember, how do we do this again and how do we do that again? And so one of the issues that nonprofits do run into from time to time is just, people forget the procedures, or how do we actually enact this thing, or do we need a vote of so much to do this, that thing, or what have you. That's why good bylaws are important, and that's why it's really important to have at least one sort of policy wonk on your board around the room that really is the stickler for the the rules and the procedures and that sort of thing. Because it can be, it can become a problem later. Nothing's going to happen immediately if you do something out of turn, but down the road it can come back to haunt you. Yeah, and I guess I don't know if anything's jumping out at anybody. I'll skip back to a couple of the other pages again. But I think I did this FAQ thing after obviously I made my presentation years ago before ChatGPT was even a thing. But I think we covered off quite a bit of this fairly well. There's details to all this. The tax implications are complicated, and I'm not going to pretend to be the expert in that. But with that being said, what questions do you have? June.
I found it.
Okay.
Number 19, can a nonprofit earn
Mhm.
So the question is, how do they know that you're reinvesting it back into the organization?
Yeah, that's a good question. Your financial statements will tell the story about where the money went. If they are, you'll have to disclose your director salaries and all that kind of stuff. And you'll have to report your income statements. And if there's money unaccounted for, now it gets a little bit complicated because the definition of reinvesting into your organization can mean a lot of different things. Hiring staff is reinvesting in your organization. Um, there's ongoing debates and, discussions about how much should nonprofit executives be paid, and are they paid too much, or, how much is too much? And, we've all heard stories about nonprofits that, you think you're donating to this cause, but then 80% of it is actually just going to salaries and so on. So it does get a little bit complicated about that, but be assured that your financial statements will tell the story about where that money is going. And um, if somebody thinks that you're siphoning off money for untoward purposes, then you will, that's just not a good idea. Kathy asks, are your 3 directors chosen from your required 5 members, or do you need 3 directors and 5 members? That's a really good question. I'm pretty certain, I'll have to look this up, but I'm pretty certain that the 3 directors can be from your 5 members. Um, don't quote me on that, because there is a possibility that I'm wrong, but I think I'm pretty certain that your 3 directors can be from your 5 founding members. And you can have, I mean, that opens a whole different discussion, because some nonprofits are member-based organizations and some are really not member-based organizations. Um, you've probably been a member of a not-for-profit, maybe even if you didn't know it, because unfortunately, sometimes once you attend a meeting or something, sometimes you actually are categorized as a member of that group, even if you didn't know it, which is not a good practice, which I don't recommend, but sometimes does happen. But not every nonprofit you have to have members for the purpose of registry of joint stock, but not necessarily members in the larger purpose that we think of members as, here, give me $20 and be a member, because not every nonprofit is set up to kind of do that, or have that kind of purpose or reach in the community. Any other comments or questions? While I'm waiting, there is somebody that I mean, there's a lot of people who work in this space who are really locally, who are really skilled and really knowledgeable. Um, some of you might know Chris Shuret. I think his company is BTW Law. I could be wrong. I think he does quite a bit of work with nonprofit organizations on the legal side of things. And there's a fellow named Richard Bridge. Richard Bridge is maybe one of the preeminent charity lawyers in Canada. He's renowned, and I don't know if he still lives in Annapolis Royal or where he lives now,
I
but
think I ran into him, I think last week, and he said, I think he had moved to the South Shore, but
oh, is
he's
that
still
right?
very busy. Yeah, he's a terrific guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's in very high demand, but he's also, I met Richard when he sat on the Clean Annapolis River Project board when I sat on the board. And it was just unbelievable to have somebody with that amount of knowledge on the board. And he's also the kind of guy who, yeah, he does a lot of work for fee for service, of course, but he's also the kind of person that if you have some questions and you ask him nicely, he'll probably tell you the answer for free.
Mhm.
Don't quote me on that. Don't tell him I said that, but he's really knowledgeable, because as you can tell, this can get very complicated. I mean, there's a lot to this. Starting is almost kind of the easy part. Um, I don't mean to discourage people, but starting can be the easy part. You do really want people around the table who have the governance and legal expertise and financial expertise to be able to keep you on track and make sure you're doing things right. Is there a restriction on more than one member of a family holding a director positions? And can that director have 2 positions? Huh. You got me. I don't know the answer to that question. I doubt that I doubt that there's a restriction on on 2 people from the same family holding director positions. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. And can a director have 2 positions? Secretary and treasurer. I'm 99% certain the answer to that is yes, they can. Sometimes I don't think it's desirable. I don't think that's the preferred approach, but sometimes that's the necessary approach when a board is sufficiently small that You just don't have enough people to fill out all the roles. Yes, I'm confident saying for sure that yes, a director can have two different positions. Better if they don't, but I've been on boards where I'm 99% sure that they do have two positions. But the first one's a good question. I'm gonna have to look that up. I can't see any real reason why there would be a restriction on that. I mean, there might be a conflict of interest in certain cases, but I guess it stands to reason that in quite a few cases, it's reasonable to think that there would be two family members who would be among the founding members of a not-for-profit because they share the same cause or interest. Other questions? All right. Well, hearing none. Oh, there's one more. I see it just popped in here. What strategy do you have for recruiting financial, legal, and admin skills needed to help a board when all hands on deck are needed? Yeah, I'll try to be as brief as I can about this. The long and short of it is that one of the worst kept secrets in the not-for-profit world is that people who are tax experts, accountants, and lawyers often have a target on their back to join boards. They are in quite high demand, as you can imagine, because lots of boards want those skills around the table. Oftentimes, I have found that to have junior people, junior people who are just sort of getting their career started in the accounting profession or the legal profession, they're often looking for board directorships. Their firms often encourage them to get involved in the community. Some of the more experienced, longer standing ones are sometimes in high demand and hard to get to join your board. And you're going to it's very hard to convince those folks to join at the very beginning because they know what they're going to be called in to do, which is to help you with all of the million questions that you have that only they can answer. But there's still, there's a lot of accountants and there's a lot of lawyers. So, my even better advice, and this might be counterintuitive, but even more important than having the right skill sets around the table at the beginning in terms of legal, accounting, and other, is having people who are passionately interested in your cause. I've seen people before try to fill out boards with skills and gotten them, but from people who are really sort of filling out a seat at the table, and maybe weren't as emotionally invested in the outcomes of the work that they were doing. And I'm not arguing against that because you can still benefit from that. But you really want to find, especially in the startup stage, you want those people who you can really count on to do the heavy lifting that is required. Everybody can join a board once the nonprofit is on cruise control. Oftentimes when you're on cruise control and you're a successful not-for-profit, sometimes people come looking for you to join your board because it's more of a feather in their cap than it is in yours. But for most nonprofits in the early stage, that is not the case. You are asking people to do a lot of heavy lifting, and that's not easy. And usually it's easier to find people who they might not have all the knowledge, but they are more than willing to sit around the table as long as it takes to do whatever it takes to get the work done. And that's who I would be looking for first. If you can find someone who's a lawyer or accountant who also has that, even better, go for it. But you really want to see that motivation there.